Honorable Judges of the High Court, Vice Chancellor Professor Krishna Swamy, Registrar of NLSIU, distinguished members of the legal fraternity, esteemed faculty, students, and friends. Ladies and gentlemen, it is an honor to stand before all of you today, representing my family and the Ahmadi Foundation at this event that commemorates the legacy of my grandfather, Justice A.M. Ahmadi. The establishment of the Ahmadi Initiative is not just a tribute, it's a commitment to the values that my grandfather stood for. And so I want to take this opportunity to thank NLSIU for remembering my grandfather and for keeping his legacy active. The Ahmadi Foundation was established with the same principles that my grandfather lived by: a commitment to constitutional values and human rights. The foundation works with academic institutions, legal experts, and scholars to advance meaningful legal and social discourse. Through seminars, workshops, and public lectures, it aims to encourage civic engagement and create spaces for dialogue on the most pressing issues of our time. Although my grandfather was the public figure, the true foundation of his life was my grandmother, Mrs. Amina Ahmadi. The Ahmadi Foundation carries her spirit as much as it carries his name. And like any meaningful effort, our work is strengthened by the association and support of those who share its ideals. The foundation remains open to those who believe in its purpose and wish to walk with us. At the heart of all of this is the principle that guided my grandfather's public purpose: the values enshrined in our Constitution. The Constitution that Justice Ahmadi upheld with such care is being tested again, in courtrooms, in public discourse, and in politics. There have been calls to remove the words secular and socialist from the preamble. This is not just about semantics, it's a challenge to the very values that our republic is based on. And these debates are not new. In the landmark case of S.R. Bommai versus Union of India, Justice Ahmadi had authored a 37-page concurring judgment in which he had traced the way that secularism is deeply woven into the fabric of the idea of India. This is the same spirit that goes back to the founding of our republic. The Constituent Assembly, in its deliberations, had considered whether to include the words secular, federal, and socialist in Article 1 of the Constitution. On the matter of the word secular, they decided that there was no need to state this explicitly. It was implicit and already embedded within other provisions of the Constitution. For example, Articles 15 and 16 forbid discrimination on religious grounds. Article 25 and 26 guarantee freedom of faith. Article 27 prohibits citizens from being taxed towards religious activities. And Article 28 bars religious instruction in state-run schools. These were all meant as safeguards to protect the secular character of our country. And then in the 1973 Kesavananda Bharati judgment, the Supreme Court explicitly recognized secularism as an integral part of the basic structure of the Constitution. So when the word secular was formally added to the preamble in 1976, it was not really a new idea. It was a reiteration of something that was already there. And so when we hear calls today to delete the word from the preamble, we must understand what is being questioned. It's not just a word, it's a constitutional promise. Today, as we hold the first lecture of the Distinguished Lecture Series, I cannot imagine a more fitting inaugural lecture than the one we are about to hear, or a more distinguished speaker to deliver it than Dr. Ramchandra Guha. One of India's most highly regarded public intellectuals, Dr. Guha's work has helped generations of Indians to understand the political, social, and moral forces that have shaped our republic. And therefore, we are especially honored that he has agreed to deliver this lecture today in memory of my grandfather. Dr. Guha's presence here today is not only an intellectual gift, but also a personal one, for which we are all very grateful. I can only imagine how much my grandfather would have loved to be here today, for there was nothing he enjoyed more than a good legal and political debate. Dr. Guha's deep insights make him uniquely positioned to ask the question that is at the heart of our democracy today. What would Dr. Ambedkar have made of the Republic of India today? It is in many ways the question of our time. Because to revisit Ambedkar is to revisit the very foundation of our democratic life. It is to reflect on how far we've come and how far we still have to go. Dr. Ambedkar gave us the Constitution. My grandfather spent his life interpreting and defending it. And if we are to honor both these powerful legacies, we must continue asking what they demand of us today. In Justice Ahmadi's own words, they were giants who gave us the Constitution. We mustn't let the pygmies pull it down. Thank you.
Good morning. In 2024, the National Law School established the Law and Society Archives with 3 objectives: to gather and make available records of the various histories of the legal profession in India, to demonstrate the ways in which society and law have shaped each other, and to systematize records of legal education. This ensures that we keep the memory of the past alive for the public, that our students work with primary sources to understand the past and themselves, and we open new avenues for research. Earlier this year, we held a 10-day exhibition at the BIC of historian Uma Chakravarti's collections, along with a series of interactive events and workshops. Today, we are glad to have worked with the Ahmadi family, particularly Insia Vahanwati, to put together a montage of Justice Ahmadi's life and work. The Law and Society Archives welcomes your suggestions, and we are happy to have conversations with you. Our contact details are on the final slide.
Aziz Mushabbar Ahmadi distinguished himself as the only Chief Justice to rise from the lowest rung of the judiciary to the highest judicial office in the country. Born in 1932 in Surat to a Dawoodi Bohra family, Ahmadi was raised with a strong emphasis on education. He initially aspired to join the Merchant Navy, but followed his father, a sub-judge under British rule, into the legal profession. In 1954, Ahmadi began practicing law in Ahmedabad. The Gujarat High Court was established in 1960, followed by the formation of the lower courts. At 32 years, he was appointed a judge in the City Civil and Sessions Court. A decade later, in 1974, he became Secretary of Gujarat's Legal Department, where he honed his administrative and policy skills. 2 years later, he returned to the bench and was elevated to the Gujarat High Court later that year. During this time, he contributed to national bodies, ranging from pay commissions to advisory panels on black marketing, smuggling, and the Ravi Bias Water Disputes Tribunal. In 1988, Ahmadi was elevated to the Supreme Court of India. On 25th October 1994, he became the 26th Chief Justice of India and the 3rd Muslim to hold the post. He served in this role until his retirement on 24th March 1997. He participated in 811 judgments and authored 232 across a period of significant political and social change. For instance, in 1992, in the Indira Sawhney versus Union of India case, popularly known as the Mandal Commission judgment, the court upheld reservations for other backward classes. The principles of the creamy layer, the 50% cap, and the exclusion of reservations in promotions all emerged from this ruling, where Justice Ahmadi joined the majority judgment delivered by Chief Justice Kania. In 1994, in S.R. Bommai versus Union of India, when several state governments were dismissed by the central government, the court curbed the misuse of Article 356 and protected India's federal balance. Ahmadi, writing a separate concurrence, reaffirmed that secularism was a basic feature of the Constitution, neither to be undermined by communal politics nor misused to dismiss elected governments arbitrarily.
Secularism means the state has no religion. it is neutral so far as religion is concerned. It will remain neutral.
Some months later, in the sensitive Ismail Farooqi versus Union of India case concerning the acquisition of land in Ayodhya after the demolition of the Babri Masjid in 1992, Justice Ahmadi dissented along with Justice S.B. Bharucha. They warned that state action must never compromise constitutional secularism. Theirs was a principled stand. In Life Insurance Corporation of India versus Manubai 1992-93, Justice Ahmadi, writing for the court, held that when a state-backed publication allows critical views, it must also allow rebuttals. Free speech, the court ruled in one of its landmark cases, includes the right to respond, especially when public platforms are involved. In Bobby Art International versus Ompal Singh Hoon, 1996, Chief Justice Ahmadi joined a judgment upholding artistic freedom. The court reversed a stay on the film Bandit Queen, holding that portraying social evils is essential to critiquing them, and reaffirmed the film's message against sexual violence. That same year, in NHRC versus State of Arunachal Pradesh, 1996, Justice Ahmadi wrote a judgment strongly protecting the rights of Chakma and Hajong refugees, despite a lack of cooperation from the state government. Justice Ahmadi believed in restraint, especially when it came to state power. He issued the death sentence only once. In Alauddin Mian versus State of Bihar, 1989, he laid down crucial sentencing safeguards under Section 235(2) of the Criminal Procedure Code, insisting that justice must always be tempered with care. Known for his administrative skill, nicknamed the Case Cracker by Sir Harry Wolff, he reduced his case pendency from 1.2 lakh to 18,000, streamlined bench allocations, and introduced computerized filing. Mentored by Justice M.P. Thakkar, who oversaw the first Lok Adalat in 1982 in Gujarat, he championed alternative dispute resolution. In 1995, he introduced the law clerkship system to India, inspired by US judicial practices. He also played a central role in setting up the National Judicial Academy in Bhopal. Even after retiring in 1997, Justice Ahmadi remained active in public life, advocating minority education as Aligarh Muslim University Chancellor and overseeing victim care through the Bhopal Memorial Hospital Trust. In response to criticism over the dilution of charges in the 1996 Union Carbide judgment, he noted that Indian law did not recognize vicarious liability and lacked adequate provisions for environmental disasters. He believed that judgments should be clear and accessible because it was officers, not historians, who had to act on them. The National Law School has a special relationship with Justice A.M. Ahmadi. He was Chancellor of the university during his tenure as Chief Justice. In 1994, as chair of the high-powered Committee on Legal Education, he proposed transformative reforms, mandatory internships, problem-based learning, and the establishment of national law schools along the lines of NLSIU across Indian states. In this video from 1995, we see him presenting degrees at the third convocation of the university, including an honorary doctorate to Justice Krishna Iyer. His granddaughter remembers him not only as a judge, but as a formidable presence at home. Witty in the company of friends, fond of long walks in the garden, and a cricket enthusiast who would gladly demonstrate how to spin a perfect firki. Often absorbed in his work, he preferred a simple betak on the floor, surrounded by cushions, court files, and towering books. In this modest, fortress-like space, Justice Ahmadi spent countless hours. We remember Justice Ahmadi by his conviction: judicial independence is not a privilege of judges, it is a protection for the people.
Thank you. Thank you all for being here today. Let me begin by expressing my deep gratitude to the Ahmadi Foundation and the National Law School for asking me, inviting me, honoring me by this particular lecture, the first in what we hope will be an annual series in Bangalore and hopefully always hosted by the BIC. I had the privilege of reading Insia Bhanvati's very absorbing biography of her grandfather, and which documents some of what you've seen in this video montage, his extraordinary personal journey from district court to Supreme Court, his intellectual and moral clarity, his enduringly significant judgments on secularism, federalism, and social justice. And on a lighter note, I was delighted to learn of his boyhood passion for cricket, and I'm not sure whether that played any role in the invitation to ask me to give this lecture. But Insia and your family members may wish to know that Justice Ahmadi's obsession with cricket when he was a young boy, to the exclusion of all else, was shared by me and also by the NLS Vice Chancellor Sudhir Krishnaswamy. So it's serendipitous that also figured in your, incidentally, in a very minor way, in your wonderful book on your grandfather. The title of my talk today is, What Would Dr. Ambedkar Have Made of India, of the Republic of India, in this year 2025, which is where earlier we marked the 75th anniversary of the adoption of the Constitution, a document in whose drafting and passing Dr. Ambedkar played such a critical role. My lecture will look at the enduring relevance of Dr. Ambedkar's social and political ideas, and how some of his insights and concerns speak directly to where we find ourselves as citizens of the Indian Republic today. But I'm going to begin on a personal note, just with some brief remarks on my individual discovery of Dr. Ambedkar. I was born in 1958, a decade after independence, in the small, what was then the small sub-Himalayan town of Dehradun, in a family of public servants, devoted, as they saw it, to the well-being of the Republic. There were scientists, teachers, social workers, doctors, but at the same time, unconsciously or consciously of a certain caste and class background, born into an upper caste, middle class family. And my family of public servants, my parents and others, took as their moral beacons Gandhi and Nehru. Possibly, actually, Nehru a little more than Gandhi in the case of my own parents. And, there was always a portrait of Nehru at home, which is red rose. And I, like many children, adopted these values and, of my parents. And I grew up admiring Gandhi and Nehru, and I'll come back to that. I don't disavow that. I still, as a caveat and a disclaimer, I still admire Gandhi and Nehru. But Ambedkar was not part of my upbringing. It was not part of my upbringing at home. I mean, I don't want to dwell too much on my personal upbringing, except to say it was absolutely, completely secular. So there was, at home, no, people were treated as equal, regardless of religion or caste or gender, but unconsciously, of course, there was the heritage of thousands of years of Brahmin privilege. So there was Gandhi and Nehru, little Ambedkar. And that continued through my journey as a college student in Delhi and on to my PhD in Calcutta, which was not influenced by Gandhi and Ambedkar because it was in the realm of environmental history. And not influenced by Gandhi and Nehru, I beg your pardon, because it was on environmental history. Ambedkar was more or less, I kind of knew that he was involved in the drafting of the Constitution, but his extraordinary significance in our history, in our intellectual, political, and moral life was awakened by a seminar I attended in Manipal in the year 1994, Now, 1994 marked the 125th anniversary of Gandhi's birth. And the great Kannada novelist and public intellectual U.R. Ananthamurthy, who then was based in Manipal for a few years, organized a conference on Gandhi's legacy. It was held in the university and on a stage like this, and against a portrait of Gandhi in his loincloth, bare-chested and a staff. You all know that portrait. And there were very distinguished scholars. As I recall, there was Ashish Nandi, Jeet Oberoi, Claude Alvarez, the environmental activist from Goa, whose work some of you might know, and others. And for 2 days, 2.5 days, we talked about Gandhi and his legacy. And, essentially, the conversation was, what would Mahatma Gandhi have made of the Republic of India today? That's really what it was, 1994. And of course, it was interesting, illuminating, enriching. On the last day, Ananthamurthy, there may be people here in this audience who remembered Ananthamurthy, and there was always an interesting twist in how he planned such things. On the last day, there was one talk in Kannada by a person who was not known to me at that stage and was known to some of the local residents of Manipal and Dakshin Kannada, but not known to the participants from northern and western and eastern India. This was the Kannada writer Devanur Mahadeva. And he gave a talk in Kannada, which was translated by Ananthamurthy. And I'm recalling it from 32 years ago. It's still visibly imprinted in my memory. So here was Mahadeva. Mahadeva, writes a very direct and sharp prose, but he has a very gentle, understated style of speaking. So he started speaking the translation, and he said, and as I said, this is from memory, I'm relying on Ananthamurthy's translation. As I did then, he said, look, we have been here for 3 days, and we've been talking against this portrait of Bapu. And he addressed Gandhi respectfully as Bapu, Gandhiji. Now, let me read out to you a poem written by a Dalit woman. And this poem, he read out the poem and he said, this poem is exalting, celebrating a portrait of Dr. Ambedkar in a suit. Now, what is the meaning of that poem? Now, supposing Ambedkar was like Gandhiji, when you see Gandhiji in this loincloth, what do you say? What tyaga, what sacrifice? An Apakas Bania, son of a divan, prosperous legal practice, gives it up to work with the people. Now what if Ambedkar is shown in that same loincloth and bare-chested? You will say, and allow me to give a Hindi translation because that's the Indian language I know best, आखिर वो तो हरिजन है और क्या पहनेगा? What else will he wear? It's his wearing a suit that is so remarkable, so distinctive, so counterintuitive, so against the grain of what history, culture, tradition, society permits to him. That is why this Dalit woman wrote a poem glorifying, celebrating Dr. Ambedkar in a suit. Now those 10 minutes of Mahadeva opened my mind. And I came back to Bangalore. I just recently moved to Bangalore and started reading about Ambedkar. And it was a wake-up call. And now, if you just, before I come to what I started reading then, after that conference, just reflect on what Mahadeva said. It's not just a contrast between Gandhi and Ambedkar. It's between Ambedkar and every other icon of the freedom struggle. Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore, Subhash Chandra Bose, V.D. Savarkar, Bal Gangadhar Tilak, Gopal Krishna Gokhale were all destined from birth and social privilege to be educated abroad, to travel abroad and wear a suit, and they may or may not have discarded it. So that is really a very important aspect of Ambedkar's journey, which Mahadeva brought to all of us, and I'm sure many others were as struck as me by his remarks. So after that conference, I started reading about and around Ambedkar, And two books in particular that I read 30 years ago made a profound impression on me. The first was Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste. The edition I read, it had been published in 1990, it had a short introduction by the novelist Mulk Raj Anand. Now again, this is quite interesting to the historian of Indian nationalism and Indian social reform. Mulk Raj Anand, back in 1935, wrote a remarkable novel called Untouchable. You know, it's the first social realist novel in English by an Indian describing the horrors of the caste system. He admired Gandhi for Gandhi's own campaign to end untouchability, yet he ended the novel Untouchable by suggesting Gandhi's methods could not provide a long-term solution, and it was only modernization and scientific progress and the flush toilet that would end the horrors of manual scavenging. Now, he came to Ambedkar much later. You know, it's through his experiences. Mulk Raj Anand grew up in a small cantonment town in the Punjab where he observed untouchable behavior. You know, he was from a middle caste himself. So in 1990, he discovers Ambedkar much later. In 1990, he writes an introduction to Ambedkar's Annihilation of Caste. And then I read Annihilation of Caste. And some of you would have read it. You know, I returned to it over and over again. I've recently wrote an introduction to a wonderful new edition of Annihilation of Caste with a very long gloss on it, which is even longer than Ambedkar's tract, by the Hyderabad philosopher Sayyid Saeed, which is a profoundly insightful book. And it's a direct act. It's a work of scholarship written for citizens. It's a model for every scholar today who wants to write for citizens, not just for your fellow scholars and for whatever it's called, citation index, Google Scholar, or whatever it's called. You know, it's written, it draws on deep learning. Of course, on personal experience, but even more on deep learning. But it's written with a directness and clarity that is truly admirable. And it shows him to be a brilliant thinker and a powerful polemicist, both. Now, again, with your permission, and with my apologies to those of you who knows this text well, some quotes from the Annihilation of Caste. I'm just going to give you two for the moment. Here's the first. You must, I quote, by the way, again, many of you know the background of the Annihilation of Caste. He was invited by a social reform group in the Punjab to give a lecture, and then when he sent the text, they withdrew the invitation, and then he printed it at his own expense. So he's telling these social reformers in the Punjab, kind of slightly left of the Arya Samaj, if I may say, those social reformers. He's telling them, you Hindu social reformers, trying to reform Hinduism, you must have the courage to tell the Hindus that what is wrong with them is their religion. The religion which has produced in them this notion of the sacredness of caste. The enemy you must grapple with, he's telling the reformers, is not the people who observe caste, but the Shastras which teach this religion of caste. That's my first quote. My second quote from this text, I quote, political tyranny is nothing compared to social tyranny. Political tyranny is nothing compared to social tyranny, and a reformer who defies society is much more courageous than a politician who defies government. Now this is, I think it's fair to say, an implicit reference to Gandhi, who's leading the movement for freedom against British rule. He's defying society too, but he's more frontally defying the state and politicians. And Ambedkar is suggesting it's harder to challenge society than to challenge the state. Now, I have gone back to Annihilation several times. So that's one book that I read then that has stayed with me. The other book is somewhat different and has a different, but in my view, possibly complementary message to the Annihilation of Caste. It was written 57 years after Annihilation of Caste. This is the late, great D.R. Nagaraj's book, The Flaming Feet, which was first published in 1993 in a small, limited edition by a Bangalore NGO, and later republished with a very detailed, rigorous critical introduction by his student, my esteemed colleague at Kriya University, Dr. Prithvi Datta Chandra Shobi, and it's available, published by Permanent Black, in paperback, and for anyone interested in this subject, it should be mandatory reading. So I read The Flaming Feet in this small privately printed edition, and it has a brilliant chapter on the Gandhi-Ambedkar relationship and debate, capturing the different parts taken by the two reformers when it comes to the question of the abolition of untouchability. And Ambedkar captures these two parts as Nagaraj characterizes these two parts as self-purification versus self-respect. Self-purification is Gandhi. Hinduism must cleanse itself of the sin of untouchability. Ambedkar is self-respect. Dalits must stand and affirm their rights in the famous slogan that he made popular, educate, agitate, organize. The self-purification of Gandhi sought to make upper caste abandon their arrogance and contempt for those whom the mere accident of birth had consigned to the bottom of the social hierarchy. On the other hand, the self-respect of Ambedkar was aimed at his fellow Dalits, urging them to claim rights of full and equal citizenship in the equal republic. Or as one might say, one can reconfigure Nagaraj's distinction between self-purification and self-respect as essentially saying, Gandhi urged the Savarnas to rid themselves of their superiority complex, whereas Ambedkar urged the Dalits to rid themselves of their inferiority complex. Now, Nagaraj was writing in the 1990s, shortly after the observance of the birth centenary of Dr. Ambedkar, when there was a real surge in Dalit self-respect, consciousness, organization. The Bahujan Samaj Party was about to be formed, and the whole narrative was posing Ambedkar versus Gandhi. And Nagaraj argued, contrary to what was then the emerging narrative, that there is, I quote, a compelling need to achieve a synthesis of the legacies of Ambedkar and Gandhi. In other words, to build a more caring society, one needed both to awaken afresh the upper caste conscience and to consolidate the efforts for Dalit self-respect. Hence, insisted Nagaraj, I quote, Gandhiji and Ambedkar can and should be made complementary to one another. Now, what Mahadeva and Nagaraj alerted me to was the extraordinary significance of Ambedkar's work on behalf of the oppressed. He was the emancipator of the oppressed. But of course, he was also a profound scholar of democracy. And it's to that aspect of his work, a scholar, a student of constitutional democracy, I'm going to turn to that aspect of his work. And I'm going to offer you some quotes from his writings. Some are well known to specialists, but bear revisiting in the light of where we are today. Some are less well known to even to specialists, and I think are as timely and as relevant. So as I said, we are now in the year of the 75th anniversary of the promulgation of the Constitution. And you will recall in the last week of January 2025, running into what happened later, every politician of every party, of every generation, of every part of India was falling over themselves to claim Ambedkar and pay obeisance to Ambedkar. Though, of course, one wondered how many of them had read what Ambedkar said about constitutional democracy, and even if they had, how much they had digested. So I'm going to draw your attention in the first part of what I'm going to say about Ambedkar as a theorist of democracy to two remarkable speeches he made in the Constituent Assembly, which are there in the debates. And I said they're known to specialists, and certainly to general readers well-versed with our constitutional history, but I think they bear revisiting. The first speech was made on 4th November 1948, while Dr. Ambedkar was presenting the draft constitution to the Assembly. Here, Ambedkar stressed the importance of what he called constitutional morality. I quote, this is Ambedkar in his speech of November 1948, I quote, "Constitutional morality is not a natural sentiment. It has to be cultivated. We must realize that our people have yet to learn it. Democracy in India is only a top dressing on an Indian soil, which is essentially undemocratic." Ambedkar goes on to say, I quote, "It is perfectly possible to pervert the Constitution without changing its form." I repeat, it is perfectly possible to pervert the Constitution without changing its form by merely changing the form of the administration and to make the administration inconsistent and opposed to the spirit of the Constitution. Now, this is Ambedkar in 1948. A quarter of a century later, in the early 1970s, the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi did precisely that. She sought to pervert the form of the bureaucracy and the judiciary by talking of a committed bureaucracy and a committed judiciary. And arguably, these ideas have been taken further by the government now in power, which has sought to rid the civil services, the police, the investigative agencies, the regulatory bodies, the judiciary, and even, as I speak, perhaps the Election Commission of the Independents, and make them subject to its political agenda. So it's perfectly possible to pervert the Constitution by perverting the administration in a way in which the judiciary and the investigative agencies and maybe even the armed forces, in ways that make them act against the spirit of the Constitution. The second speech of Ambedkar's to the Constituent Assembly, I am going to draw your attention to, is a better known speech. It was made on 25th November 1949, when he presented the final document to the Assembly. And here he issued two warnings. This may be the one part of my lecture which possibly even a majority of this audience is familiar with the quotes. So I beg your indulgence in repeating quotes that may seem familiar, warnings and sentences of Ambedkar that may seem familiar, because I think they bear revisiting, reflecting upon afresh, given where we are today. The first one is about personality cult, so I'll just read you an abbreviated version. Bhakti, or what may be called the path of devotion or hero worship, plays a part in India's politics unequaled in magnitude by the part it plays in the politics of any other country in the world. And then Ambedkar adds, Bhakti in religion may be a route to the salvation of the soul. Bhakti or hero worship in politics is a sure road to degradation and to eventual dictatorship. Now, this is 1949, and we have just observed the 50th anniversary of the Indian independence, where we saw this colossal personality cult. And allow me to say that the personality cult we are now living through is equally large, possibly even larger, because modern means of technology have allowed this cult to be magnified even further. So and I'll return to this personality cult warning of Ambedkar's a little later. I mean, this is the one part I think most of you will be familiar with. The second warning, which is also there in that last speech, is really in some ways even more significant, because it goes to the heart of, Ambedkar's thinking. How it goes to the heart of where Ambedkar, the champion of the oppressed, merges with Ambedkar, the theorist of constitutional democracy and the chief draftsman of the Constitution. So this quote I'm going to read out to you is kind of bridges Ambedkar the citizen and Ambedkar the scholar, Ambedkar the activist and Ambedkar the constitutionalist, Ambedkar the professor. Again, it's well known, but at least to specialists, but still, I'm going to offer to you again. So here is Ambedkar saying, while presenting the final approved document of the Constitution to the Assembly in November 1949, he's saying, I quote, on the 26th of January 1950, which is when that is where the country is going to adopt the Constitution. The 26th of January, incidentally, was chosen because it was the 26th of January 1930 that the first Independence Day was observed by the freedom struggle, what was then called the Independence Day. So Ambedkar says, on the 26th of January 1950, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will have equality, and in social and economic life, we will have inequality. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one man, one vote, or as we would now say, one person, one vote. In politics, we will be recognizing the principle of, if I can amend Ambedkar in the light of what is approved terminology today, in politics, we will be recognizing the principle of one person, one vote, and one vote, one value. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure, continue to deny the principle of one person, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? How long shall we continue to deny equality in our social and economic life? Now, if you consider this very significant and indeed vital distinction that Ambedkar makes between equality in politics and inequality in social and economic life, 75 years later, that disjunction still persists. I mean, of course, Ambedkar may not have recognized, I'm speaking on, what is it today, the 13th of July, 2025. Ambedkar may not have recognized that there could come a time that we may need not even have one person, one vote. Right, but let's assume we do, and all the noise about, the electoral rolls revision in Bihar is just noise. Let's assume that we do. Let's suspend our critical judgment for a minute. But there still is, where is one person, one value? Okay, now, when Ambedkar made this distinction, very important distinction between equality in politics and inequality in social and economic and cultural and institutional life, he largely had the rights of Dalits and women in mind. The Constitution had abolished caste and gender distinctions, but Ambedkar worried that in everyday life, discrimination against Dalits and women would persist. Hence, this warning that he issued to his fellow members of the Constituent Assembly. However, 75 years later, where we are today, apart from Dalits and women, there are two other social groups who in the India of 2025 are discriminated against, who don't have the same value, even if they may sometimes have the same vote, as other sections of society. And these two other disadvantaged groups, apart from Dalits and women, are Adivasis and Muslims. They, like Dalits and women, have the vote, but yet they are not often treated as equal citizens. The dispossession and discrimination that Adivasis have experienced since 1950 are arguably even greater than that of the Dalits, though for multiple reasons it has not got the same attention. And the harassment, stigmatization, and outright persecution of Indian Muslims is more intense now than at any time since January 1950. The democratic principle of one person, one value is especially denied to them. So what I've tried to suggest so far in my talk is that Dr. Ambedkar is justly celebrated as a great social reformer, as an emancipator of the oppressed. At the same time, I've argued, he was also a deeply original thinker about democracy and constitutionalism, as these examples I've quoted from his speeches in the Constituent Assembly, I think, demonstrate. Now, I'm going to offer some other select Ambedkar quotes made outside the Constituent Assembly, before and after. Constituent Assembly, again, I'm really happy that now the Constituent Assembly debates are all available online. When I was writing my book, India After Gandhi, the original edition was out of print. And believe it or not, I read it in Stanford University. I'd gone there for 3 months and I read it, and Now I have them all. They were reprinted by the Lok Sabha Secretariat about maybe 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And I'm glad they're all there online. I think when Sudhir was at APU also, he played some role in having them all put online. And I mean, to those of you who are not law students, please read them. I mean, they're incredibly illuminating. Whatever, as an aside, I write my own books, but I take great pleasure in editing the works of others. And some of the books that have technically appeared under my name, are actually edited by me, and their anthologies I've done, including of political theorists, environmentalists, cricket writers, and so on. And I'm now probably too old, but one of my unfulfilled ambitions, which some younger scholars should do, is to do a really interesting curated edition, anthology of the interventions in the Constituent Assembly, by theme, including some of the themes that were so dear to Justice Ahmadi: federalism, social justice, equality, language, gender, freedom of speech. I think it will make a fascinating exercise, and of course the whole diversity of views, including the completely crazy views, including those, I mean, I forget who it was, I think it was a politician of this state, by the way, who said, who complained about the Constitution, that we have got only a Western orchestra, where is the sitar and the veena? Now, it's not, by the way, criticism I sympathize with. I should make that clear. But at least when it comes to constitutional values, you don't know what ancient Indian society would have given us. Okay. Indian music is different. I love Indian music. But anyway, so I just quoted some what Ambedkar's speech in the Constituent Assembly. I'm now going to give you, in the next part of my talk, in the penultimate part of my talk, some other select Ambedkar remarks made before and after. First, from a talk to trade union workers in 1943, I quote, "It has been recognized that the state cannot be held at bay by corporations that are anti-social in purpose." A later speech, Ambedkar likewise warned, I quote, "We must not lose sight of the fact that big business is trying to play a great part in the political life of this country. If moneyed people try to influence the elections by contributing to the election fund of any political party, what would be the result?" End quote. Now, I don't have to draw the personal implications of these remarks in the India we live in today, So that's 1943-44 on big business. From an intervention, my next quote, from an intervention in Parliament in February 1949 on the Hindu Code Bill, which Ambedkar and Nehru were trying to pilot at that stage through the Provisional Parliament. And many conservative members had opposed it and had quoted this Smriti, that Smriti, this ancient sage, that ancient philosopher. And after listening to all of them, Ambedkar said, I quote, "I once counted 137 Smritis. And I do not know why our ancient Brahmins were so occupied in writing Smritis and why they did not spend their time doing something else," unquote. Now the point here, it's a slightly sarcastic remark, but it has a very profound truth to any reformer. The point here is that the Democrat and the social reformer must appeal to reason and justice, not custom and tradition. And incidentally, Gandhi would have agreed. If you, after the Pune Pact, when Gandhi was in prison, he was visited in Pune. He was visited by countless learned men of the Hindu faith, quoting this Smriti or that Smriti, and Gandhi just said, I don't know what they say, but I can tell you, untouchability is bad. That's all. It doesn't apply. Reason and justice should tell us it is bad. Well, that's now my next quote. This is from after the Constitution, and after Ambedkar resigned from the cabinet and restarted his own party, the Scheduled Caste Federation, to fight the forthcoming general elections. This is a speech made, and appropriately since there are so many students here today, a speech made by Dr. Ambedkar to the students of DAV College, Ludhiana, in the Punjab, in October 1951, after he resigned from the cabinet. I quote, "For the past 20 or 30 years, we acclimatized ourselves to one single political party." Now the reference here is essentially from the 1920s when Mahatma Gandhi launches the non-cooperation movement, really the major hegemonic dominant political party in India from 1920 to 1951, when Ambedkar is speaking, is the Congress. So he says, for the past 20 or 30 years, we acclimatized ourselves to one single political party. We have nearly forgotten the necessity and importance of opposition to the fair working of parliamentary democracy. We have nearly forgotten the necessity and importance of opposition to the fair working of parliamentary democracy. We are continuously told that opposition is an evil. And then Ambedkar continues. One important thing in parliamentary democracy is that people should know the other side, if there are two sides to a question. Hence, a functional opposition is required. Opposition, says Ambedkar, is the key to a free political life. For the government may suppress the facts, the government may have only one-sided propaganda. Now, just think how strikingly relevant these remarks are today. Ambedkar is warning of the dangers of a one-party, almost a one-party state, what the political scientist Rajni Kothari called the Congress system of Indian democracy, which roughly existed from, I'd say, 1920 to 1967, when, the 67 elections had, of course, the Congress winning re-election in the center, but many state governments being formed by opposition parties, so much so that it was said you can travel from Delhi to Howrah without going through a single Congress-ruled state. Now, so today when we live in an era of creeping, maybe not so creeping, single-party hegemony of the BJP, I think these warnings are worth recognizing. My next quote of Ambedkar, and the last quote of Ambedkar's that I'm offering, and then I'll give you some concluding remarks of my own, is from that same talk of October 1951 to college students in the Punjab. I quote, parliamentary government means negation of hereditary rule. No person can claim to be a hereditary ruler, unquote. Now, this celebration of democracy, this affirmation of democracy as a repudiation of the hereditary principle in politics was a point, and governance, was a point Ambedkar made repeatedly from the 1920s. Therefore, as some of you may have been delighted when I quoted his remarks about personality cult and single-party hegemony, let me say that Ambedkar would have been equally opposed to political parties being family firms, to a single family claiming, to the hereditary principle. Let me be very blunt. The hereditary principle in the Congress party of today would have been absolutely repugnant to Ambedkar. And in the DMK, and in the Shiv Sena, and in the Akali Dal, and in the RJD, and the SP, and so on. So let's be clear about that. He was a proper Democrat, an anti-feudal Democrat. Okay, now, speaking of personality cults, Ambedkar would have, today we have, again, if you look at the Indian political system today, it's really a tragic Hobson's choice for us, voters and citizens. You either have political parties who are personality cults, not just the BJP. You think of Mamta in West Bengal or Vijayan in Kerala. It's quite not. It's, as they say about Vijayan, he's Modi in a mundu. Now, or you have parties that are family firms. Now, Ambedkar would have been opposed to both. Speaking of personality cults, Ambedkar may not have been surprised by the extension of this Indian love for hero worship, uncritical hero worship, to spheres other than politics, with successful cricketers, film stars, and businessmen also elevated to godlike status. But perhaps he would not have been surprised by that, because he was seen it as intrinsic to Indian character, to democracy being merely a top dressing on Indian soil. But I believe, as a student and admirer of Ambedkar, that Ambedkar might have been embarrassed about the sometimes excessively worshipful adoration he has been subjected to by his own followers today. All right, now, my lecture so far has followed the lines of the title of the lecture. What would Dr. Ambedkar have made of the Republic of India today, 75 years after the promulgation of the Constitution, in whose drafting he played such a critical role? I've indicated the many areas in which his ideas continue to be of compelling relevance. However, as I conclude, I'd like to warn against taking Dr. Ambedkar as omniscient, as the first, second, and last word on the problems that plague our republic today. I'd like to warn against turning to him and his writings and his life, exemplary and remarkable and original and perceptive as all of that them might have been. I'd like to warn against turning to him as through his life or his ideas or his legacy, providing answers to all our problems with regard to democracy and social justice. There were some areas in which other contemporaries of his may have more to offer to us than Ambedkar today. I mean, Ambedkar can teach us a great deal, but there may be certain areas I think he will recognize that, All of us are focused because of our personal journeys, our intellectual and social and moral preoccupations on certain issues, and maybe, pay less attention to others. So when it comes to safeguarding the rights of minorities, religious minorities, I think it's quite clear that Gandhi and Nehru are more relevant. In what order? In my own view about this, again, some years ago, some scholars in this audience may recognize that, may remember that there was a debate that posited by academics, political theorists, that posited Gandhian secularism versus Nehruvian secularism, and sort of suggested that Gandhian secularism was fine, but Nehruvian secularism may have been a foreign import. Actually, from the point, just as we needed Gandhi and Ambedkar both, maybe Ambedkar more than Gandhi, but also Gandhi, to delegitimize the pernicious practice of untouchability, which had to be delegitimized both by vigorous activity and opposition by the Dalits and by guilt-ridden upper castes, whom as Gandhi would have wanted to rid themselves of their superior complex. Likewise, if you look at secularism, actually the protection of minority rights, the legacies of Gandhi and Nehru are complementary. Nehru emphasized that the state must not have a religious caste or religious orientation. After Gandhi died, again, this is as a historian, I would like to remind the audience that, Gandhi's death, Gandhi was murdered by a right-wing Hindu fanatic. That is well known. What is not so well recognized is that 6 weeks after Gandhi's death, the Communist Party of India, under orders from their Russian masters, launched an armed insurrection against the Indian state. So the infant Indian state was pierced from left and right. And had Nehru and Patel not been together, this state, I could not have been speaking to you today. How Nehru and Patel, comrades and co-workers, have been made rivals and adversaries in the afterlife is a separate question. But I want to focus here only on what Nehru did at that time. The backdrop of partition, the ethnic cleansing of Hindus and Sikhs from the western Punjab, the ethnic cleansing of Muslims from the eastern Punjab. Millions of Muslims have decided to stay back in India and vote with their feet to be citizens of India. And the revenge and persecution coming not only from the Hindutva right, but even from conservative members of Nehru's own Congress party. And if you read his speeches, they're absolutely extraordinary. And if you read his letters to Chief Minister in 1947 and 1948, where he says, whatever Pakistan does to its minorities, we must give our minorities equal citizenships and the rights that they deserve in a civilized state. And this continues, right? If you study his speeches in the first general election and what he's saying, he's fighting the first general election on the planks of equal rights for minorities and equal rights for women. Those are the two planks on what he's fighting for. Right. Now, equal rights for women he shared with Ambedkar totally. But on the question of, I said, rights of minorities, Nehru was clear that the state must intervene to stop violence against minorities. Gandhi, on the other hand, worked in the level of civil society to build trust, reciprocity, understanding, between Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, but also Sikhs, Parsis, and so on. Hence his remarkable innovation of the interfaith prayer meeting. So when it comes to safeguarding the rights of minorities, Gandhi and Nehru may be more relevant, for they devoted their life and work to try to see trying to make sure that India would not become a Hindu Pakistan. When it comes to gender equality, perhaps, particularly in the workplace, perhaps early feminists like Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, on whom there's been a wonderful biography by Nico Slate, which I urge you to read, are more reliable guides. When it comes to the question of environmental sustainability, an issue which neither Ambedkar or Nehru recognized because of their commitment to large-scale industrialization, when it comes to the question of environmental sustainability, both Gandhi and Tagore were more prescient than Ambedkar or indeed than Nehru. When it comes to the vital role of civil society in acting as a check to the excesses of the market and the state, when it comes to this, the role of civil society, Kamaladevi and Gandhi may again be more instructive role models. The Congress-dominated nationalist narrative of the 1950s and 60s diminished the role and significance of Ambedkar in our political and moral history and elevated the role of people like Gandhi and Nehru, which is why growing up, as I did in a family of civil servants in northern India in the 1960s and 70s, they were the two people who are always talked about, and Ambedkar not at all. That Ambedkar's work and ideas are now better understood and more widely appreciated is very welcome indeed. It was two remarkable subaltern intellectuals of Karnataka, Devanur Mahadeva and D.R. Nagaraj, who first opened my own eyes and mind to the greatness of Dr. Ambedkar and the enduring relevance of his thought. In the decades since, I discovered Ambedkar through Mahadeva and Nagaraj in the 1990s in the state of Karnataka. In the decades since, as I have read more books about him and more writings and speeches by him, my admiration has steadily grown. Yet, in the year 2025, we should not make the reverse mistake of, shall we say, dumping Nehru and Gandhi and taking Ambedkar as our sole and only guide. In seeking to make this, our country, a republic more worthy of its founding ideals, we may need the guidance of some other remarkable figures apart from Ambedkar. Of course, we need Ambedkar too. In my own personal pantheon of moral and political exemplars, Ambedkar rests alongside four other visionary makers of modern India. These are Gandhi, Nehru, Tagore and Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, who, with Dr. Ambedkar, constitute a quintet to whom I return often for nourishment and inspiration. Let me end this lecture having made my case for a more plural, inclusive, shall we say, pantheon of moral and intellectual exemplars in which Ambedkar has a very important and honored place, but is not, subject to the kind of hero worship that he warned us against. But let me end this lecture largely about Ambedkar. So let me end with a last quote from Dr. Ambedkar himself. It is from an unpublished essay on Buddha and Marx, written in the year 1956, shortly before Dr. Ambedkar's conversion and then, of course, his tragic early death. And this is what the quote says, I read, quote, "Nothing is fallible. Nothing is binding together, forever. Nothing is fallible. Nothing is binding forever. Everything is subject to inquiry and examination." Thank you.
Thanks to Professor Guha, as usual, for a very, I think, a fantastic talk, which draws, I think, from the inspiration in some ways is the annihilation of caste, where you get a sense of a wanting to communicate with the audience. And I think that communication happened very, very beautifully, very powerfully. And I think the important thing of the talk to me was the fact of thinking of Ambedkar in the larger context of the moral pantheons or moral exemplars, which think of in the Indian context. And I think for those of us in Karnataka, we'll also empathize with the rooting of the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate in the context of Karnataka. And in particular, the invocation of both Devanur Mahadeva as well as D.R. Nagaraj. and the imperative. Again, if the two important thematics of Professor Guha's talk, one, of course, is the entire thing of going back and revisiting the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate and seeing in what way we can think of the two together, as it were. I just want to add maybe one thought to that from Professor Bakshi's corpus and his discussion on the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate, where he comes up with this very, I think, very interesting point. He says, you look at the entire Gandhi-Ambedkar debate, you'll really struggle, and Professor Guha, you are the scholar of Gandhi, in the 100 volumes of Gandhi, is there any reference to, in Professor Bakshi's words, to a single bloodied Dalit corpse or single mutilated Dalit body? Ambedkar's corpus, on the other hand, you go to Congress, what Congress and Gandhi have done to the untouchables, it's marked by the violence the Dalits have suffered. So it's very interesting. Again, you make the point of Gandhi's source, or his point was self-purification. Self-purification may not necessarily have meant you need to go into the ritual or the horrific violence experienced by the community. Self-respect means you have to go to the violence, as it were. And again, what is the implications of self-purification, self-respect for a constitutional vision? And again, I think the key point, of course, is the idea of dignity comes from your commitment to the idea of the complete personhood of the individual. That's, I think, very, very importantly an Ambedkarite kind of a contribution. So thank you for getting into the Gandhi-Ambedkar debate from that particular viewpoint. And the question, again, when you get to the larger implications of the nation, I thought the very important point you made, again, is to draw Ambedkar into the question of the notion of a social and a political democracy. And again, the very important point is Ambedkar reminds us again and again that a democracy is, as you rightly put it, today we have to talk about the question of elections, but not just about the question of elections. The idea of associative life. When you say associative life, it could be as much as about your relationships on grounds of caste, on grounds of gender, on grounds of sexuality, a range of ways in which people are discriminated and people are not able to enjoy the full sense of a right to personhood. Again, the reference point you made is very, I thought, very important, where you go back to the point, Ambedkar's point, again, he says it almost tongue-in-cheek, where he says it's not that easy being a political revolutionary. End of the day, your entire community is behind you. If your community is not behind you and you're a social revolutionary, you're isolated and you're alone in the world that you face. And I think that's, the reminder again and again to us to go back to the idea that it's very difficult to change society. Again, the point is this. If you're a political revolutionary, it's very easy. Comparatively, you have a state, you're the opposition to law, this law needs to go. That's quite simple. But in Ambedkar's point, caste is not a barbed wire. It's not a fence. It's a line in your mind. And how do you erase that line in the mind is a very challenging question, which I think he rightly raises before us. And here the question, the only question I'd really ask you is when it comes to the he's very committed. Ambedkar is very committed, perhaps I think Gandhi as well, to the question of economic equality and the question of concentration, addressing the concentration of wealth. You go to even Buddha and his Dhamma. The point again Ambedkar goes back to is the idea of non-possession is very important. The idea that the bhikkhu must not have too many possessions. And that has interestingly implications with Gandhian idea, where non-possession is important. So there's a way in which you're conscious that inequality is an issue which needs to be addressed. But again, when you think of the vision, Gandhi goes, of course, which I think you're right to point out to the fact that's very relevant in today's context. When you're looking at climate change, you have to go to Gandhi on that point. But when you go to a question of addressing inequality, what is the particular Ambedkarite vision? Is it the states and minorities vision you'd go to? Is the question of nationalization you'd go to? Is the question of a democratic socialism, which maybe Mr. Zoran Mamdani kind of platform you'd go to? What is the platform you'd go to in terms of thinking of Ambedkar and an economic vision? The social vision we've got, in a sense, from when we read his corpus. What would be the economic vision, as it were? And maybe the last question before we open it out, is how do you kind of get together? I get the point that we have to go to Gandhi, we have to go to Ambedkar, and we have to go to Tagore. That's quite, and Kamaladevi Chattopadhyay, as you put it. But how do you reconcile the sometimes often conflicting visions, which both Gandhi and Ambedkar might have had, or Tagore and Ambedkar might have had. Ambedkar and Nehru might have been more on the same page on a lot of the questions, as it were. Yeah.
So, thank you, Arvind. It was absolutely fascinating. I mean, the last part, that's the choice of every Indian today who cares for a better, more caring, more, shall we say, inclusive, less destructive future for his or her compatriots. What to draw from Ambedkar, what to draw from Gandhi, what to draw from X, what to draw from Y, people I have not mentioned. But I think it is the spirit of, Indian democracy, Indian pluralism, that we don't have one exemplar. I tell my Ambedkarite friends, I completely understand, going back to your question of experience, what they may have experienced, which I as a Brahmin have not. What Ambedkar experienced and what Gandhi did not. I take the point that Ambedkar must be your most important figure. But A, must you hate Gandhi so much? B, can you stop a Brahmin like me from also admiring Ambedkar? You can't. So I think that is where all of us have to build, as my teacher Shiv Vishwanathan would say, we have to build our own compost heap of all these different ingredients and make it work for us, or make it work for all of us. But I think experience is I'll come to economic vision in a minute, but let me dispense of the economic vision. Though I have 2 degrees on economics, I understand no economics. This is a confession and also a reflection on the Delhi University economics examination system, where my dear friend V. Ramani, who was an economics topper, gave me his notes and told me, anticipate, okay. But I understand society and politics. So, which is my lecture was also really about society and politics and culture to some extent, and and environment. So, on the economic vision, I defer to wiser people. Clearly it can't be pure socialism, it can't be pure capitalism. What mix? How much decentralization, how much state intervention. Interestingly, of course, Gandhi, I talked about Ambedkar's opposition to hereditary rule. Gandhi's idea of trusteeship was that, the child of a prosperous businessman does not inherit. The businessman holds it in trust for society, And maybe some of the American entrepreneurs more than ours, some of us too, but more the American entrepreneurs have practiced this. Someone like Warren Buffett, who gave all his money to somebody else to run. He didn't even start a foundation in his name. I mean, it's an extraordinary act of self-abnegation, which I think Gandhi would have approved of. But on economics, I think Gandhi's, I won't presume to comment. But on this audio, I cannot resist your quoting Professor Upendra Bakshi with such delight and such affirmation. My dear friend Upen, I'm sure, all you lawyers have a great, and I'm sure even among lawyers there may be divided opinions of Upen. Upen is sometimes too clever for his own good, as his remark shows. No, where did Gandhi write about Dalit mutilation? Now, if I was to answer, and I call him Upen because he's an old friend of mine, let me call him Professor Bakshi today, since he's Professor Bakshi for most people in this audience. If Professor Bakshi was to say this to me, I would say, if I was to speak like you, I would say Gandhi talks all the time about the mutilation of innocent Muslims. Where does Ambedkar talk about it? What kind of answer would that be? It would be trivialized and vulgarizing the whole debate. It is absolutely true that because Ambedkar grew up in a certain environment, he understood. It's a question of experience. The question, Ambedkar understood these in an elemental way, in an experiential elemental way. He had seen it to his mother, his sister, his brother, his father, his other fellow, Dalits in the village. Gandhi had not seen that. But Gandhi was able partly, but on the other hand, Gandhi, through his experience with Muslims in South Africa, with Muslims in Bihar and Bengal, was able to see certain things. Gandhi's understanding of Dalit harassment and persecution was largely academic, and partly actually a result of people who informed him. Part of the greatness of Gandhi was that he was always learning. Ambedkar changed his views a lot, as Nagaraj documents. Right. For example, intermarriage, Gandhi came to accept because of Ambedkar. But even before that, he was changing. If you look at Gandhi's understanding of the Dalit question, before Ambedkar, there was his Dalit associate in South Africa, Lawrence and Lazarus, who told him that in the diaspora maybe be equal, but if you go to rural Tamil Nadu, you'll find something else. Narayana Guru, whose followers persuaded Gandhi that temple entry was, So I'd say this is, and I don't want to get this whole thing into a defense of Gandhi versus Ambedkar, but I think there's a very interesting meeting points. And even with the conversion, Eleanor Elliot, I should have mentioned, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention Eleanor Elliot in my book. Eleanor Elliot is the great doyen of historians of untouchability. She's an extraordinary American scholar, now tragically deceased, who in 1966 wrote a magnificent thesis called Dr. Ambedkar and the Mahar Movement. She could not get a publisher in that, because in India at that time, because that was the climate where it came to, books on Ambedkar. I mean, it's really the Dalit Panthers in Maharashtra, whom, again, I should have mentioned, who influenced our Kannadiga Dalits too, who actually brought Ambedkar in the public discussion. But even his conversion on Buddhism, Eleanor Elliot, and I take her as an authority I respect and trust, writes that after the conversion, Ambedkar told his friends in Nagpur, I told Gandhi, as Ambedkar famously said, I was born a Hindu, I will not die a Hindu. He said that in 1935. 21 years later, he converts after considering Sikhism, Islam, and Christianity. He converts as a Buddhist. And Dr. Elliot says, Ambedkar told his colleagues in Nagpur, I told Gandhi, I will convert in a way in which will not harm us, Indians. Now, what does that mean? He's left enigmatic. Does the Buddha preach non-violence? Does he preach non-possession? Does he preach the middle way and hence environmental sustainability? Is it an Indian faith and not a foreign faith? We can't say. But I'd just say one last thing, Arvind. When it comes to Ambedkar and Gandhi, it's an endless and fascinating debate. Arvind is not unsympathetic to Gandhi, but kind of favors Ambedkar. I am deeply sympathetic to Ambedkar, but maybe for whatever reasons prefer Gandhi a little bit. But actually, if you look at this debate, I sometimes think that the only person who could have done true justice to this debate and its depiction and its understanding and unfolding all the layers is not Arvind Narayan, is not Ramchandra Goa, is not Professor Ubendra Bakshi, but would have been either Girish Karnad or Vijay Tendulkar. That I think it needs and maybe there's a young playwright, not necessarily two. I've quoted two. Apologies for mentioning two Brahmin males, two deracinated Brahmin males. It could be a Dalit, it could be a woman, but I think only a playwright can. I mean, it's just so much charge it has: emotional, political, cultural, historical, philosophical, religious charge. That I would love for a young playwright to. I wish Girish Karnad or Vijay Tendulkar had done it, but they're gone. Somebody else has to do it.
Thank you, Professor Goa, for that fantastic response. I think we'll open it now to the two, three questions at a time. Yeah.
If anyone has a question, request you to kindly raise your hands.
So my question is basically that Baba Sahib warned that the success of Constitution would not only depend on the structure of the Constitution, but also on constitutional morality.
Yeah.
In your views, where do you think that the modern India has failed in upholding the same? And
good afternoon, sir. My name is Pranav Bhalla. I'm a first-year law student at NLS. So my question was, what do you think Ambedkar would attribute as the reason why casteism would exist to the extent it does in a state like Bihar, especially since we were mentioning the electoral revision? Considering the fact that if you were to take the caste census statistics at face value, the majority of the population belongs to a backward caste. So why would casteism in a state like Bihar still be such a big imposition on society?
Yeah, sure. One more?
Good afternoon, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. To start off, I'm really thankful to NLS and Justice Ahmadi Foundation because I believe discourse, be it religious, social, or constitutional, is really the need of the hour. Coming to my question, when you earlier talked of two classes of the society which are discriminated and being alienated against, particularly the Adivasis and the Muslims, when it comes to, let's say, the religious minorities being the Muslims and Christians, do you think Dr. B.R. Ambedkar would have advocated for some sort of reservation or any other provision for the upliftment of these particular social groups in today's India?
Yeah, thank you. So I'll try and answer all of these. Now, reservation is a very ticklish issue. What would Dr. Ambedkar have thought of? Clearly, he was absolutely approved of SC and ST reservation. Would he have come to recognize that some OBCs needed reservation? What would he have thought of the creamy layer? What he have thought today about Dalit Christians and Pasmanda Muslims? Now, these are, in his writings, you really have no clue. I mean, Arvind knows his writings better than me. But my own view is some amount of reservation is definitely important. There is a question about to whom, whether I personally believe, and I'm now hanging myself out to dry here because I presume this lecture will be broadcast. I personally believe the Supreme Court was wise in setting a 50% limit. And that 50% limit can be surely used in a more interesting way to include some other groups. So, but again, in Ambedkar's writings, you don't have don't have really a clue, as far as I know. On why is casteism so prevalent? I think part of it has to do with what Arvind said, associative life. How many do we meet? Do we hang around only with our caste men? Part of it has to do with absolutely such little intermarriage. I think there have been studies that show that 85 to 90%, or probably more than 90%, are still within the same caste, if not the same subcaste. Part of it has to do with, and this is where Ambedkar and Nehru, of course, differed with Gandhi, that the village, as Ambedkar famously said, is a den of iniquity. The fact that Bihar has seen least urbanization, industrialization, may be part of it. On constitutional morality, I think that's, Ambedkar, of course, was drawing on the works of George Grote, the British thinker. But it's a very profound point. And in some ways, there's a parallel between Gandhi and Ambedkar on the question of personal and public morality. I mentioned you, not for the first time, I chastised the Congress party for being a family firm. It won't be for the last time either, by the way. But one of the interesting aspects about Gandhi is that he had 4 children. All went to jail several times in the freedom struggle. Not one became an MLA or an MP. We know that Harilal was denied a law education because he was Gandhi's son. But this is also a certain kind of morality. Now, when it comes to constitutional morality, how do policemen behave? How do civil servants behave? How do judges behave? How do they internalize this? I mean, I think this is a deep moral flaw in our society. And when this linked to what Ambedkar said about top dressing on Indian soil. But it has to be, at all levels, it has to be incorporated. And how is it done? And sometimes it's the most unusual person who advocates constitutional morality. Today, of course, one of the ways in which constitutional morality is not obeyed is in Parliament and in our legislators, where they hardly any debate, or it's uncivil. I mean, they don't know how to disagree without being disagreeable. To quote the late Representative John Lewis. But also, it's just this idea that sometimes opposition and ruling party are brought together under the false flag of jingoism. For nothing else, not for more constructive. And let me give you one example, since this is you and many other people in this room are too young to remember this. But one aspect of post-Ambedkarite, post-Gandhian, post-Nehruvian constitutional morality that has been enunciated in Parliament, that has stuck with me ever since, comes from the unlikely source of a former RSS pracharak. Nanaji Deshmukh was a lifelong RSS pracharak who became a minister in the Janta government of 77 and 79. When he saw how that government fell, he left the RSS, left politics, and became a social worker in rural UP. And after 20 years of social work, he was nominated to the Rajya Sabha. And during the 2002 Gujarat riots, I mean, this is, in a sense, this example comes spontaneously to me, but is not irrelevant to the person after whom this lecture is named. In the 2002 Gujarat riots, and you've all read about it, and you know the polarizing stuff that still goes on social media and so on. Nanaji Deshmukh made one of his few speeches in Parliament. He said, the Prime Minister, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, and the leader of the opposition, Srimati Sonia Gandhi, should go on a joint peace mission to Gujarat. That to me is constitutional morality in action. Whether Ambedkar would recognize it, I don't know. But this idea of, for the larger good, for mitigating suffering, for not promoting yourself and your kinsmen and your religious and your castemen, that is where I think Ambedkar, I think, would have absolutely recognized the profound nobility of that intervention by Nanaji Deshmukh. And that's why we need to bring in to all spheres of our public life. And it's hard because of, but it's a very important aspect of Ambedkar's teaching. I mean, I think, again, this goes to, just one last, this goes to the fact, I mean, Gandhi and Ambedkar is fascinating because they are both incredibly wide-ranging. You will find no two thinkers who write about everything. One on the basis of experience and learning, one on the basis of experience and intuition. Gandhi was a very poorly read man, which I don't hold against him, by the way. But I think this idea of constitutional morality, I mean, Ambedkar was also a deep philosophical thinker, and I think these aspects of his work, but I see that as, absolutely, relevant to where we are today.
Hi, sir. It's
Where? Yeah.
it's very nice to
Stand
listen
up?
to you.
I can see you then. Can you stand up there? I can see you. Yeah, thank you.
Hi, sir. It's very nice to listen to you. I encountered you for the first time when I completed 10th class. I read your book, India After Gandhi, and it got me something to do with history, and I'm very thankful for that. My question is simply that I have read Gandhi and Ambedkar, and Gandhi addressed the depressed class as Harijans, but Ambedkar addressed as Dalits.
Correct.
I am very naive for this, but can you please explain why is this contradiction?
That's a very good question. I'll answer that. It's a very good question.
Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Dr. Guha. I am Ishan. I am a student of economics from St. Stephen's College, Delhi University. So I think your analysis is pretty apt in how economics is taught.
But I'm sure you know more economics than me.
Oh,
Even
well,
at your age.
I doubt. Before asking a question, just a comment, because you ended it with playwrights tackling the debate of Gandhi and Ambedkar. Rajesh Kumar has written a play of the debate of Gandhi and Ambedkar, which keeps staging in Delhi, and I think all of us could perhaps have a look at that.
We'll bring it to BIC.
Oh, for sure.
Ask him to contact Vikram Bhatt and Sandhya. We'll bring it here.
So my question is fairly simple. Would Dr. Ambedkar call himself an Ambedkarite? What arguments of an Ambedkarite today would he perhaps take with a pinch of salt? Thank you.
Very good question, yeah. One more maybe, yeah. Hey, you're... No, we're going to ask a question.
Hello, sir. Good afternoon. Thank you so much for the lecture, first of all. I am Hemang. I am a third-year student at the National Law School. And the question that I had essentially had something to do with the top dressing on Indian soil quote that you made of Ambedkar. The way that I see it, that there are two levels of intervention possible to say remedy the situation that we have currently. And I think that it's both the top dressing and the Indian soil currently, which has undergone a sort of rot. That it is both the formal legalistic institutions that we've come up with to remedy societal problems that have undergone some sort of decay, and both at the societal level as well. So currently, from where we stand, where should our interventions be pointed towards? Towards a more legalistic formalist interventions, or towards a more societal, civic, society-based intervention?
So, my answer to the last question will be somewhat, shall we say, commonplace. As I said, again, it depends on where you are. But, I think for a truly functioning democracy to work, there are three levels. There's the state, there's private enterprise, and there's civil society. So I would say, I mean, notwithstanding my saying I understand no economics, I allocate private enterprise a greater role than either Ambedkar or Nehru did. But not as great a role as the current regime does. So you need private enterprise to generate innovation, wealth, employment, but hopefully with some kind of ethical understanding. You need society to practice constitutional morality, to draw on proper expertise, and you need civil society to be a check. Today, one of the aspects of where we are today, which is also true, by the way, of the 50s and 60s, was a great, one should, notwithstanding my admiration for Nehru, one should not be too nostalgic about that period because there was no civil society. The state was supposed to solve everything because we had these wise and enlightened leaders from the freedom struggle. And the emergency civil society was crushed, and civil society really flourished in the 80s and 90s, and now it's being crushed again. So I think Raghuram Rajan wrote a book calling these the three pillars of democracy, and he's absolutely right. So state, market, and civil society. So again, it depends on how it has to be all. As individuals, we may make our choice where we work, and how we try and enact our, shall we say, our constitutional orientation. Now, the question on Ambedkarite and Ambedkar. Right, now, Marx famously said, I am not a Marxist. Ambedkar would have said, I am not an Ambedkarite. Gandhi may certainly have said, I am not a Gandhian. So I think, but some aspects, I think the kind of extraordinary self-organization, that self-respect is so much more visible and active and even influential in everyday life, in intellectual, political, cultural life. I think Ambedkar would have approved of, That I think absolutely. But, if you look at, if someone was to do a really good intellectual biography of Ambedkar, with Gandhi you can see, with Gandhi you have Rai Chand Bhai, you have Gokhale, you have Tolstoy, you have, Tagore to some extent, and you have his own experience. With Ambedkar, I suppose there would be Dewey, there would be Mill, there would be the Buddha, there may be a little bit of, so I think it would be interesting to see what he would, but I think what aspects of Dalit self-assertion and self-respect he would have absolutely endorsed and approved of, whether having Ambedkar worship is easy, I can't say, I can't answer for that. Or the question of Harijan versus Dalit. Dr. Ambedkar virtually never used the word Dalit. Never. I would stand corrected if in the occasional Marathi writing he may have used Dalit, but in all his English writings, it is a legal category. It is depressed classes, scheduled castes, and or untouchables without the quote, but with a U capital, to designate their, how they are oppressed in society. So he never used the word Dalit. Dalit comes into use common currency with the Dalit Panthers in Maharashtra, and I'm glad it's used now. Harijan was an unfortunate choice by Gandhi. It was criticized at the time. In fact, if you read my biography, I talk about how Gandhi, it resonated with Gandhi because it was a term used by Narsingh Mehta, the great Gujarati poet whom he admired, who also wrote Vaishnava Janato, which is a beautiful hymn, resonant with meaning and entirely relevant to where we are today. But Gandhi adopted it, and Rajagopalachari warned him against it. When the Harijan Sevak Sangh, this is an interesting story about how India functioned then and still functions now. When the Harijan Sevak Sangh was started, Rajagopalachari wrote to Gandhi, saying, what is Harijan Sevak Sangh, social welfare? Adopt a direct name, Anti-Untouchability League. And that proposal was not accepted, partly because the babus in the office said the stationery has already been printed. Now, this is so, but absolutely, it was a term that had a patronizing connotation even then, and I'm glad it's not used anymore.
Hello. Yeah, hi sir. It has been really nice listening to you. My name is Devak Agarwala. I am a first year BLLB student in NLSIU. Over the last 75 years, there has been a lot of development in Dalit society, the status of Dalits in this country. I guess my question is, according to you, what would B.R. Ambedkar think about the status of Dalits in today's India? And would he be satisfied with the progress that has been made, or would he be dissatisfied?
Hello, sir. Thank you for the talk. Professor Anand Teltumde was of the opinion in one of his lectures that...
Can you stand up? I can see.
Yeah. Professor Anand Teltumde was of the opinion that there are no more movements which are specifically focused on annihilation of caste. Yes. There are a lot of movements and works on uplifting the Dalit and Bahujans on economic scale, but nothing on annihilation of caste. Even the speech that you referred to, he's talking about, and he's also making a reference to destruction of Shastras and so on. Along the line, did we focus too much on the economic life and then forgot the associative life? And is there a need for us to go back to that, annihilation of caste, much more aggressive and, pointed work? Yeah, thank you.
This will be the last question.
One more here. Yeah, that lady there. Yeah, after.
Yeah, hello, sir. My name is Rachit, and my question was mostly regarding the legacy of Dr. Ambedkar. Now, you mentioned in your talk about how Ambedkar's legacy was kind of lost during the Congress rule in the early years of independence.
Yeah.
And it was only with the evolution of the Dalit Panthers and the formation of the BSP and the rise of regional political parties that Ambedkar politics and Ambedkarite philosophy kind of came to light. My question is mostly along the lines of, does it require appropriation by a political party of a thinker like Ambedkar, who was kind of radical for most political parties of his time, and whether such kind of selective appropriation, as we see in the case of Ambedkar's arguments against the partition, where he kind of makes a case against how Hindus and Muslims can never coexist, and how that kind of selective appropriation by political parties such as BJP or the RSS can be prevented in any way.
Yeah, good afternoon, Professor Goa. I'm an educator. I come from a place where we talk about where did Ambedkar's thinking develop from, and his influence from Dewey or Mills. Or what I see missing in Indian education is the critical thinking part. The last quote you mentioned about inquiry. Now, if you're not going to build that inquiry into any of the institutions we have, how do we go ahead with this thinking of educate and agitate, or like to move ahead with the thinking of Ambedkar if you're not going to build up critical thinking at all? What's your views on that?
No, these are all wonderful questions. Some of them are beyond my competence. I don't really deal that actively with education. I hesitate to prescribe, how people should appropriate or misappropriate Ambedkar. One of the advantages of living in Bangalore is that you're not compelled to be a Rajguru. But I would just try to repeat, and they're all very interesting. I mean, all the questions show concern, anxiety, worry, vision, a deep sense of wanting things to be better in this country. But so I would say this, that as a kind of conclusion to all of this, I would say, and in a sense sum up some of my remarks, that I think the Congress narrative of the 50s and 60s kind of ignored Ambedkar. I was, a victim of that, and so were others. Today, the danger is twofold that these questions have pointed out. And that we present him largely or even solely as the emancipator of the untouchables, which is the kind of the Dalit position. Or we appropriate him in cynical ways, like quoting some of his remarks, critical remarks about Muslims in his book on Pakistan. Now, I think Ambedkar had a very wide vision. And I think now some very good scholarship is emerging, from different perspectives. Looking at Ambedkar, I mean, if I look at some of the recent thoughtful works that don't pigeonhole him, the work of Scott Stroud, or of Valerian Rodrigues, again, one of our fellow residents of Karnataka. If you look at the very good biographies by Anand Teltumde, who was mentioned, and by Ashok Gopal. Now, maybe this more multi-layered, multi-dimensional view will start come into our understanding. And maybe, the critical thinking you want in the education system will also be there. I'd just like to make one remark at the end, and maybe I should repeat what I've already said. Just as my pantheon always has many people. As a historian, I'm always hesitant to people ask me what is the most important problem that India faces today, or what is the greatest challenge, what is our greatest achievement. I think always a problem, singling out one. But I would say that when it comes to Ambedkar's legacy, those two, among all the quotes I've offered you today, the best known ones may also still be the most enduringly relevant. the one about the dangers of personality cults in all spheres, not just in politics. Even your question, don't think your teacher is the last word on anything, right? But don't think that, Facebook or WhatsApp is the first word on anything either, right? Or ChatGPT, By the way, can I tell a joke about ChatGPT? Can I tell one joke? Okay. I got a lovely forward the other day from a friend, a cricket-loving friend, in a cricket WhatsApp group. The only WhatsApp group I like being part of, the cricket WhatsApp group. It said it was a ad for a tea stall. Chai GPT. Genuinely pure tea. Fueled by AI, adrak and ilaichi. Now I think that's how it is. So critical thinking, absolutely, so to return to serious matters. The two statements of Ambedkar that I think are the most well-known and the most, as it compellingly relevant. The one about personality cult, is there in all spheres of life. The other is about this disjunction between one person, one vote, and one person, one value. And there I would like to say, consistent with my resistance to having only one hero or one cause, I would say that really there are four discriminated groups in India today. There are four groups where one person, one value is largely denied to them. Not only, you may have, people of Dalit and tribal backgrounds who are in big positions, but these are Dalits, Adivasis, women, and Muslims. All four. I think which means I think all four. That is really the unfulfilled, belied promise of constitutional democracy in India. That 75 years later, these four sociological categories, of course there are other issues. I mean, they are the issue of under trials and harassment of dissidents under our obnoxious laws, but as sociological categories, Ambedkar was also a sociologist, among other things was also, I think Ambedkar recognized that visionary prognosis of his, that when will we have one person, one value, and apart from all the individual cases of one person, one value being denied in our legal system, among others, it is these four groups of Indians who are somehow, women, and possibly one could add a fifth, non-heterosexuals. I think one would have to add a fifth. I think that's where I think Ambedkar's, that remark of his, I think links to what Arvind said about associative life, and I think that's where all of us as thinking, feeling, moral human beings, not necessarily Indian, only Indian, I think need to go back to those warnings of his. I think they are still enduringly relevant to us today.